Welcome everybody to tonight's Queer Table Talk. My name is Dominic Green. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I'm the Programs and Faculty Manager at Inclusive Communities. Before we start tonight's conversation, I would like to acknowledge the traditional homelands of the Native and Indigenous people who lived and took care of the land that most of us gather on tonight. That land belonged to the Omaha, Ponca, Pawnee, Oto, Missouri, Santee Dakota Sioux, Kansas, Iowa, Cheyenne, and Winnebago people. We honor with gratitude and pay our respects to all Native and Indigenous people. Omaha Table Talks, or as we call them OTTs, was initially recreated in Omaha in 2003 by the Social Justice Advisory Committee of Catholic Charities, Omaha. In 2012, Inclusive Communities acquired OTT and shifted to a larger public discussion format over comfort food. Due to COVID-19 this past year, we have shifted to holding these events over Zoom, but still welcome you to have a snack, food, beverage with you as we have these discussions. We're also always looking for ways to grow and get better, and invite you to please fill out our evaluation link that we'll share with you at the end of tonight's event. We'd like to thank our OTT sponsors, Lozier Foundation and Cox Communications for making these events possible to happen. And at this point, I'd like to turn over to my colleague Colin McGrew to go over some housekeeping and logistics. Colin.
Perfect. It sounded like you were going to say my Colin, and I also welcome that as well. Hi, everybody. I'm just going to share my screen here. Oh, perfect. Dominic's going to share my screen here real quick, just to go over some digital norms, some like virtual agreements, things that we found have like helped us have a successful kind of a discussion situation here. The first thing I always like to highlight, and it looks like it's happening right now, but we do have some ASL interpreters present for tonight's event, Jamie and Pam. So you'll see them kind of float in and out from this pinned video situation. If you would like to utilize their services during one of the breakout room sessions, please message me or Molly, and we'll make sure that we can get you into a room that has either Jamie or Pam there. And so make sure that you can do that. And then we also encourage folks here, if you want to go to the next slide, Dominic, just to remain on camera if you're able to. I totally get if life's happening behind you and you want to kind of remain that a little bit of privacy that way. This session is being recorded, so that is another reason that you might also want to turn your camera off. Feel free to utilize any of the chat reactions and things like that, but we do ask that folks remain on mute while the presentation is happening, unless there's like a designated question and answer portion, which there will be at some point tonight, but we'll kind of take cues from our moderator, Abby. Feel free to raise your hand either in your camera, or also Zoom has a reactions function that you can utilize that as well. And then, we also encourage folks to update your display name, just include your first name and pronouns. And you can do that either through the participants tab, or you can hover over your particular video, hit those 3 dots, and then rename yourself there. And then with that, I know Alina too is going to post a breakdown of the event here, just so you kind of can know what to expect in terms of timeline. But if I didn't forget anything else, Dominic, I'll pass it on to you. You can kind of throw it to our panel.
Sounds good. Before we go on with the panel conversation, I would like to acknowledge our ASL interpreters, Pam and Jamie, and also let you know that if you would like to use the closed caption feature, there is a closed caption feature, and it will be should be at the bottom of your screen. And I feel like yep, it is turned on right now. Thank you for that, Molly. Also, our Colin's acknowledge our volunteers. Thank you so much for being here and helping us out tonight. Like Colin said, we will be having a Q&A session and Abbi will be taking us into that after the panelists introduce themselves. At this point, I would like to turn over to Abbi, who is the Executive Director of OutNebraska and our lovely partner tonight for these queer table talks. Abbi.
Thank you, Dominic. Thank you so much for being here, everyone. This is a great event, and we're looking forward to the conversation that we'll have with you. OutNebraska is a statewide organization that works to celebrate and empower LGBTQIA2S+ individuals across the state. We do that in a variety of ways through education, celebration, and advocacy work. And so we encourage you to educate yourselves and to be in this space tonight with the opportunity to be a little bit awkward, right? To allow yourselves to have an open heart and an open mind and to be learning from these conversations and from the great panelists that we have with us this evening. We do have tonight Avalisa Gallo and Eli Rigatuso, and I will let them introduce themselves. Each will share their story, and then we will open it up for some question and answer. And then I think comes next the breakout rooms. But let's let Avalisa start. Please introduce yourself, share your story with us, and what you would like folks being here this evening to know about you.
Hello, my name is Avalisa Gallo. I have been a trans rights advocate, activist for quite some time. I transitioned back in the early 20-teens, and since then have been very visible. My visibility means that when I'm in a public space, when I'm in most public spaces, I'm not just, this random person. I am the Black trans woman that most people kind of direct their things to. But I do that because education is important. And while education is important, it's not everybody's responsibility to educate you on what they're going through and the intricacies of their life. And so because I want to take that weight off of other people's shoulders, I am very open and I am very honest and I am very forthcoming when it comes to having conversations like this, so that the people that I care about and the people that live the same experiences or very similar experiences to me don't have to do the emotional labor of having these conversations. I have done all sorts of things to help my community. And I honestly had to have someone sit me down and be like, we need a volunteer resume for me to actually sit down and think about the things that I was doing as actual work. Because most of the times I just do them because I want to do them. I want to be there. I want to help, because at the end of the day, it's about education and I want to help people understand. And so I am here. Please make use of the fact that I am here and I am willing to answer your questions and I'm willing to talk very frank with you. Yeah, that's me.
All right, well then I guess I'll just jump in. My name is Eli Rigatuso and I am a native Omaha, Nebraskan. So I was born here and raised here. I tried to escape once and was sucked back in. That's a whole nother story in and of itself. What you may not know about me, or those of you who do know me, is that I could actually easily fill an hour up with all kinds of stories. So I'll try to keep this brief. But anyway, born in 1965, first generation born off the reservation, which again is another whole story in and of itself. But I bring that up because it's really important to understand the intersections of identities. I very frequently will introduce myself as a queer, transmasculine two-spirit of the Menominee Nation. And I do that very specifically because each of those identities holds something important about me and who I am. But also I use this as kind of a step into saying to folks, hey, ask your questions, right? When I came out at the tender age of 50 in 2015, I came out as transgender, and I went out of the frying pan and into the fire. I had, I don't know if I had maybe some rose-colored glasses on or something, you know, when a company has a non-discrimination policy, and I think, hey, they're gonna stand behind this policy, only to find out that that actually is not true. And so I kind of came to this whole conversation with like a committed need for people to get their knowledge and experience elevated, like now. I was pushing in my own place of employment to have education be started, was willing to share on my own about that, and to help uplift and elevate folks' knowledge and awareness around transgender, non-binary, and gender nonconforming identities, only to continually be hit with roadblocks. And so what I ended up doing is I started speaking of Happy. And my motto was, you have questions? Well, guess what? I've got the answers. And just like Avalisa says, you know, I'm open to having those conversations. I'm open to answering those questions that you're afraid to ask. But I always have this little disclaimer that I love, which is, you may not like all the answers, though. And my identities are not up for debate. I am, however, willing to point you in the direction of information that you can find, that you can read, articles that I've saved. I mean, like I said, I went out of the frying pan right into the fire, and I have done nothing but solid research almost daily about myself, about all of my identities, about how all of those things have impacted my life in ways that I didn't understand until I came out as trans. One of my absolute most favorite people in the whole wide world, Ashley Marie Preston, talks a lot about intersections of identities and how important it is, how imperative it is that we see our joy, that we recognize the joy of being who we are as trans people. And I think that we honestly are the true unicorns. We are blessed. We are gifted. I've met so many incredibly brilliant and amazing people since I came out as trans in 2015. I've talked to parents of trans kiddos who will burn down villages to protect their kids. And I just think that it's so wonderful. And I've been able to have some really intimate, beautiful conversations with folks. And, you know, so, I mean, my story is complex. There is no one single place to start, but I can tell you that the reason why I do this is because I honestly live my brand. Speaking of happy, I'm happy to have the conversations. I'm happy to get in the mud with you and start digging to heal the roots, because that's where the biggest sickness is. It's in the roots. We can't just slap a tiny little Band-Aid on a gaping wound. We have to get in there and do some healing. And it had to start with me. So I had to start my own healing, the healing from my indigenous parts that were stripped from me, the healing of my identity that has been stripped from me, the erasure that I've felt in various places in my life. So I believe it's an honor. It's an honor to be here and to share space, as always, with Avalisa. I love her so much. And Andira, I think she's coming. I got a message from her that she's heading in here soon. But just she's here. Yay. So I'm gonna wrap it up so that she can introduce herself. But I just thank you all for being here, for being willing to open your minds and your hearts to hear our stories and to celebrate with us our visibility and who we are as trans people. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Andira, I'm so glad you made it. Please introduce yourself and share some of your story as our third panelist.
Thank you for having me. It has been an interesting day. I had my vaccine shot yesterday, and today I am a bit fuzzy, which has made my morning a comedy of errors as I went to work. So my pronouns are she, her, they, them. I have been involved in community organizing for over a decade, and I am on the board of OutNebraska. I also run the local trans community group. And I generally like to keep busy and be very social. So the pandemic has been quite challenging for me in that way. I've discovered that a lot of who I am and my values and what defines me are social. And it's good to be going out in the world a bit more and to have the vaccine now. It is interesting because at a young age was very alienated, and I felt that I didn't have a place in the culture. I didn't see anyone that felt like me or any potential for who I could be in the world. And it was a long time before I saw any really just not terrible depictions of trans women or people who were outside of traditional gender norms. And I realized to a point, I couldn't even fault some of the people in my life because of how colonialism and toxic culture has erased all positive views of looking at people who aren't within a narrowly defined cultural binary. And I realized that a lot of my alienation in my youth was that everything was binary and people were put in categories and had particular expectations of interests, and it all felt wrong to me all the time. And I couldn't really put my finger on it because people were so effective at negating my story of who I was and my truth of who I was, to the point that it really wasn't worth it to tell my story for a long time, to express who I was, because I was a very small feminine child and people just treated me badly. And to try to speak up and make my voice known was just something that I was aware of. Oh, I can do this to be treated worse. So it took me a long time to get out of that and to find my voice and to become myself. And I really relish the opportunity to share that with others and give people the opportunity to examine that and see me as prospectively a role model, if not like people want to be me, but people want to be themselves. And I think it means so much to people to see someone trying to authentically be themselves. And people tell me that, and I hear that resonation. And that's a big part of why I speak in groups. And I love that connection. And I think the authenticity of speaking out as a trans person, especially to cisgender people who don't get it, is they see the real life experience, and you can kind of get outside of the tokenism or the stereotypes of who people are and really get to know someone. And that is, to me, the vital first step in changing cultural perceptions and normalizing diversity. So I'm really happy to be here today, and I am looking forward to the conversation that ensues.
Terrific. Thank you all so much for being with us tonight, for each being willing to take questions. You have attended a table talk before, you know, generally the moderator asks the panel questions, and then there are some breakout rooms. We're actually doing it just a little bit differently. Tonight we are opening up our question and answer right now. So if there are questions that people want to ask, you can raise your hand you can type them in the chat. We have Dominic and myself watching the chat, and we can convey those questions to our panelists, because this is, as they have each said, an opportunity to ask questions that you maybe haven't had the opportunity to ask before. So.
And we have our first question in the chat, and this is directed towards you, Eli. It's Eli, what was the name of the person you love who talks about joy?
Ashley Marie Preston. She is a Black trans woman who literally snatched Caitlyn Jenner's wig many years ago, shortly after I came out as trans. She's just an amazing human. If you Google her, there's a ton of YouTube videos and whatnot of speeches that she has done, and she's just a very powerful advocate. First of all, for Black trans women, for people who engage in sex work, because she is a former sex worker, someone who's in recovery from drug and alcohol addiction. I mean, she's just truly an incredibly inspirational human. So if you have a chance to look her up, I would do that.
Terrific. We do have another question. This is for Avalisa. What is the pressure you face in the Black community?
That's really interesting, because I had this conversation with some friends on Sunday, and there is a separation that I have from my Blackness because of the toxic hypermasculinity that exists within the Black community. And so it's this outward aggression towards Black women, not only from outside of the Black community, but also within the Black community. And that kind of boils down to femininity. And so little boys who express femininity, a lot of parents are under the understanding that it is okay to beat that out of their children. And so with that in mind, with that in everybody's head, when it comes to trans women, there is so much violence that exists, that is expressed towards us within the Black community. And so when it comes to my experience existing within the Black community, I understand where I'm safe and I understand where I'm not safe. And so a lot of that is gray area, and I just don't interact whatsoever to keep myself safe, because at the end of the day, the lifespan for a Black trans woman is 35 at most. And so I am trying to stay alive. I am trying to continue to be in spaces like this where I can openly talk to people about what's going on, and the stereotypes and the stigmas that exist in today's society that make it dangerous for people like me, that make it dangerous for people like Eli, that make it dangerous for people like Andira. It's absolutely terrible. And within the Black community on its own, I do have this separation, but it's also a separation that I feel throughout society, period. I'm always very cautious of every interaction that I have. I'm always listening passively to everything that everyone is saying, because I want to make sure that I am in a place where I am safe, because all it takes is for someone to show some type of interest in me and someone else to say, oh, that's a man, for it to go from a very safe situation where I'm casually minding my business to a very dangerous situation where I may or may not lose my life.
And sorry, go ahead, Abby.
I was going to say, we've had a couple of other questions come in. We did have the person who asked that question say thank you, Avalisa, for answering. We've had a question come that asks, I think, of all of the panelists, what advice would you give to a public school teacher about creating a welcoming classroom environment for LGBTQIA2S+ students? And so I think each of you can lend a short answer on that question.
Yeah, 100%. If you want to create a really good environment, specifically in a classroom and with children, you use pronouns that are asked for, because people will specifically ask you to use very specific pronouns. If you use those pronouns and encourage all the other students to use those pronouns, and when you see something that is negative, speak up, say something publicly so that everybody knows that's not okay. That would make me feel safe as a young child and as a student.
I think the other piece of that is, if you are an open and affirming teacher in a public school environment, pushing for the administrators at your school to get the education that they need. And then to continually be educating one another in regard to this topic, inviting folks like myself and Avalisa and Andira to come in and do talks with the staff, because I think one of the things that happens, and I've had kiddos in schools, public school systems here in Omaha, who have said, they've had training, and then I hear that they're being misgendered, and I go and find out that yes, they've had training, but they're doubling down and trying to make up some sort of excuse for why this trans kiddo is still being misgendered. I mean, one trans kiddo is being misgendered as an instructor, as a faculty member, was taking a they them pin from them and misgendering them as they were doing it. And then when I went to have a conversation with that faculty member, because it turns out that faculty member was also a friend of mine, this person doubled down and tried to say, but I'm a lesbian, so I get it. And I'm like, apparently you don't. And that's the other thing, is understanding that we can't conflate sexual orientation and gender identity. It's like we all have that conflated. The minute somebody finds out I'm trans, they're like, oh, like trying to understand who I sleep with. Or somebody says, love is love. I'm like, well, yeah, sure, love is love. However, what does that have to do with my gender identity? Right? So, I mean, it's such a complex conversation all the way around, but it's like, if you're going to advocate, don't just advocate for that one student, and don't wait for that student to show up in your room. Start putting practices in place now for how you're going to just be non-gender specific across the board. I mean, I think that's the biggest thing, is to just, not necessarily erase the binary. Everybody can have their identity, right? It's important to acknowledge people for who they say they are, but put practices in place as the educator where you're saying, hey, look, I don't want to make any assumptions about who you are. So today I want you to all write down your pronouns and let's have a conversation about pronouns. It's really that easy. But you also have to know that is your administration going to support you or not? And if they don't, what are you going to do to change that? I mean, I know there's only so many hours in the day, though.
Yes. So some basic questions. I had my first shot yesterday, and I did experience the symptoms of COVID-19 for like 4 days previously, so I'm pretty sure that I had it, though I never tested positive. So I know there's a lot of variables there. Everyone reacts differently, and they warned me about possible fever or other issues, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, if I feel unwell, but you wake up in the morning and you're tired, and you just continue to feel fuzzy or have a somewhat diminished capacity, and then I'm realizing, wait, why did I lock my purse in my house? Why am I, oops. So it was humbling, as illness is, and informative. My name, I just came up with, but I understand that there's a number of women in Brazil who have that name. So I guess it was a good idea if other people also chose it. In fact, I even had someone message me who had the same name, and we talked about it, and it was funny. And I asked her, well, what does our name mean? And she said, gratitude. And I'm all about that. Incidentally, I am the front desk of the Nebraska Department of Education. for the commissioner's office, and that's been interesting. It's really been lovely to work somewhere where they are supportive and behind me and value equity within the office and are doing important work. That's been refreshing. A lot of people want to say that they do those things, but to experience people making efforts to commit to it is in many ways a new experience for me. And I would say in terms of education, I think that's so vital. A lot of people come from really difficult backgrounds, and I don't know any trans people who haven't had a lot of trauma in their childhood, a lot of people negating who we are and quieting us. And as Avalisa said, like just denying who we are and quieting us and trying to shut us out. And so I think that what's important in education is the opposite, is making a space for diversity, is having those conversations, is making sure that children aren't shamed or belittled, that there are consequences and plans to deal with mistreatment. Because I didn't understand when I was a child why people mistreated me. I didn't get it. And no one really stood up for me. This cultural misogyny is so ingrained in people that they don't even realize why they're doing it. They don't understand what's going on. And like Eli said, no one's addressing it because they don't even realize it's a problem. And it's unfortunate that you can talk to people in leadership at various places, not just in education, and they say, oh, we don't have that problem here. Like, well, have you looked at the information that's there? Have you talked to people, or are you just saying that? Because I don't think that's the case anywhere. I think that this is a vast cultural problem that is everywhere, and anyone saying that, it should be a red flag that they are not looking. So I'm glad that efforts are moving forward to improve that and that I can be a part of it. It is interesting. I have a name that I usually pronounce it Andira, but I also like the Spanish pronunciation, Andira. I also like how people who oh, my brain, generally from the Middle East say it with a similar inflection, and it's fun that people pronounce my name in different ways that reflect their culture and language, and I really enjoy that. Except white people who usually mangle it and don't ask. So that informs my perspective a little bit, and I like having a unique name because when someone says my name, I know it's me. And that's part of why I picked an uncommon name, is because why would I want a name that everyone else has? So I will let this move on.
Thank you for that. And
I noticed that there was a question back up there a little bit about that was directed at me about intersections of identities. And then there was another one about being two-spirit. I'm just going to kind of fold those two things together. The Evelyn Wood speed reading response to those two questions is that, first of all, being born in 1965, first generation born off the reservation, always knowing that I was Native American, but being treated, consistently having to deal with classmates making fun of me for being Native. I had to face folks wanting to erase that part of my identity, like as I got older, and I would not spend as much time out in the sun. And I actually even had people say things to me like, oh, did you get your 23andMe results back? Is that, and you're a quarter, you're a, 5% indigenous, and your great grandma is a Native princess. And I'm like, no. I have always known that I was Native American. I'm a quarter indigenous, and none of that should matter. If you did a little research around blood quantum, you would be disgusted. by even asking those kinds of questions. Because blood quantum, according to my blood quantum, because of the year I was born and boarding schools didn't end until 1978, there was a point in life when someone with my amount of Native blood would have been forced to live on a reservation. Boarding schools didn't end until the late 70s. If I'd have been born on a reservation, I would have experienced the boarding school. But I tell people, look, my parents, my mom was a devout Catholic, bless her heart to this day, that she believed in Catholicism until the day that she filed for divorce from her husband, my father, and the Catholic Church shut the door on her face. And then at that point, so many years later, she says to me, I wish I would have listened to you when you warned me that this religion wasn't doing what it needed to do for our family. Because they, of course, had kicked me out, didn't want me around. But being raised in a Catholic grade school, I experienced the boarding school. In the early 70s, whether you were in a boarding school on a reservation or you were going to a Catholic school off a reservation, the experiences are very similar. I experienced abuse at the hand of some of the priests and nuns at the school. So did many of my classmates. I have known since a very young age that there was something about me that was different. And I knew that not just based on the color of my skin, but intrinsically how I felt about myself. The more that I started to learn about what it was, my culture and my traditions, I realized Two-Spirit actually is what truly I embody. I believe intrinsically I am both and. So I am both masculine and feminine. I think right now, the reason why I hold so staunchly to the pronouns he, him is because for 50 years, I didn't have a choice. For 50 years, I had to put myself in a place where you would just see me for what you thought I was. I put on a show. I was one of the hottest drag queens you've ever met in your life. I was such a hot drag queen that I got the nickname Femme Girl. And when I came out as trans, I had gay folks saying to me, but wait a minute, now I'm confused. Are you gay? Because they also have conflated sexual orientation and gender identity. So the intersections of these identities for me takes this whole, it's like there's these complexities that I can see as not complex anymore because of all the reading that I've done, because of all the ways in which I read things and then I can see in my life how I've experienced discrimination and erasure throughout my life. But it didn't all come together until I finally admitted that one deepest truth about myself, and that is that I am trans. Two-Spirit falls under the trans umbrella more on the non-binary side, but again, Two-Spirit is only for folks who are Native American, and not all Native American tribes honor folks like me as Two-Spirit. They have different names from different tribes for Two-Spirit folks. And so, that can vary, but it's really important to understand. It's like some of the complexities that Avalisa talks about, both of us, I think, could talk about and speak to colorism and how that impacts our lives. I've heard Avalisa share about the standards of beauty, and she fits in the binary and the beautiful, like the standards that we put forth for what we deem as beautiful. I'm a chubby trans guy. And I'm not seen and heard the way that most people are seen and heard. I mean, I shaved my face recently and I think I look a lot softer and a little more like the Pillsbury Doughboy, but that's not what people see when I walk out into the world. I'm consistently misgendered even still today. And it's even worse when people show up at my house to provide services that I'm paying for and I get misgendered. That's my reality in my own home, not even feeling safe. Do I say something? Do I not say something? Is this person going to come back again next month or is this the one and done and I don't ever have to worry about it? But then again, they know exactly where I live. I don't want to have to live in fear of whether or not someone's going to show up at my house and do something to me. But look, this is where you can find me now. This is the only place where I've been. I'm working from home. I got sick and hospitalized with COVID last August after my mom died because of it. And so, you know, there's all these different things that we navigate as trans folks that many cis, straight, white folks will never experience in a lifetime. And I'm not saying that to make anybody wrong. It's just a reality. So it's important to understand those intersections.
If I can go next here, Eli brings up some.
I'm sorry.
Oh, breakout rooms already?
Yes, actually, I'm sorry to interrupt you. This is one of the hardest things about being a moderator is sometimes wrapping up the great conversations that we're having, but we do want to do some breakout rooms for folks, and then we're going to come back into the larger group again. So Dominic, was there anything that you needed to say before?
Yes, so Colin's just going to share with us some norms that we usually do before we go into breakout rooms. Colin, can you just quickly unmute and go through these?
Yeah. These are just some things that we think help kind of facilitate the conversation in those breakout rooms. So things that I will mention prior to going through those is, one, the conversations in those rooms are not being recorded. And two, we always encourage folks to kind of nominate or deliberate who might be a good person to share out some highlights of those conversations when we all kind of come back together. It also might be a good time to think of some questions we might want to ask the panelists for kind of that final Q&A portion as well. But in terms of how to operate in those spaces, we say one mouth, one mic. So just making sure we're taking some proper turn taking. The Vegas twist, just meaning stories stay, but the lessons leave, making sure we allow people to keep their stories confidential if they so choose. Making space and taking space, keeping open minds, and then, as always, just carrying yourself with general respect as well. In terms of the breakout rooms, you won't have to do anything on your end. We have them set up, ready to go, and you will be automatically brought back from those breakout rooms when the time is up. So, did I miss anything?
No, and so we'll have 20 minutes for these breakout rooms, and Colin will send you into them now. Again, if you would like to have Pam or Jamie in your breakout room, please let Colin or myself know, and we'll put them in the room with you. We'll see you in 20 minutes.
Here we go.
All right, welcome back. So in Omaha Table Talk QTT's tradition, we'll just take a minute for each room to share out, and I invite the facilitators from each of those rooms to be the ones who share out what was discussed and if there were any call to action or advocacy steps that were discussed even in the breakout rooms. So first we'll start with room one, and that'd be Jamel.
Yeah, so we talked about how it's great to hear the panelists' willingness to be open and honest with their experiences, specifically their childhood experiences. We discussed how emotional their stories made us feel and how we connected on that emotional level, which was really helpful. Avalisa was in our group and she talked with us. She shared a little bit about how it felt to be otherized, and that was eye-opening. She stated that, most of the time people are seen as male or female, and then when you don't fit into that group, you're other, and then that kind of dictates how you're treated by other people and how that makes people in the transgender community feel, and what possible violent tendencies that can lead to. I also asked her a question about her intersectionality and how she felt about being open to, engaging in other areas of her identity. And she said, specifically for her, I asked about being Black. And she said, my question really boiled down to, does her Blackness still matter amongst all the other issues that she has to deal with? And, that was a question that she grappled with. Does it still matter when she's standing up for the Black community, but the Black community won't stand up for her? And then we also talked about some action steps, and Avalisa stated, small things is where it starts. If you're amongst your peers and you hear someone say something, they're comfortable saying that around you. And what happens when, you make them uncomfortable, you tell them, I don't agree with that. That's not something that I want to hear. And how that affects your relationship from then on. We also spoke about education, and bringing education to our organizations would help. Advocate for the transgender community. We also talked about opportunities to engage in dialogue with members of the transgender community and how that humanizes and connects people on different levels than having a speaker come in and talk about their experiences. And lastly, we talked about the book Cast, and there is a pillar, inferiority versus superiority, and how that translates into the transgender community and the bigger society.
Thank you for that. Our next share out will come from Mandy with room 2.
Yes, so one of the quotes that we walked away with was from Eli. My identities aren't up for debate. That really stuck with us. I think overall we had lots and lots of questions. There was a lot of curiosity and wanting to know more. And at the same time, there was a lot of empathy and feelings, because it seemed like we all had some element that really we could understand. We felt like we didn't belong in Omaha, or we were judged as a Black man, similarly to how Eli spoke about being mispronounced. So yeah, those were the standouts.
Awesome, thank you, Mandy. And so moving on to our room 3, this will be coming from Maxwell.
Hello. In room 3, we were honored to have Andira in there with us to help we were able to ask her some questions. And we did start off the group with talking about, we were talking about moments that when we were listening to Eli speak, he was talking about multiple, just the concept of having multiple identities and kind of reflecting on that together. Then Andira was able to kind of give us, piggybacking on the multiple identities, kind of her experience with her discovering her own and that process and how it hasn't ended. Anyone. And then Jess was able to ask a question about her work environment, on what has happened in her work environment that has helped kind of make her feel included and such. And then she was able to kind of answer based off on how her bosses stuck up for her and how they have listened, and it hasn't felt like sorry, I have really bad handwriting. She has felt respected, and that they haven't just asked questions just to confirm their own biases. Yeah.
Thanks, Maxwell. Moving on to room 4. So this will be Alexander sharing out for room 4. And if you could maybe share 2 or 3 points that really came out of your all's conversation, that'd be great.
Sure, good evening. So our conversation was, of course, the incredible impact of listening to Avalisa and Andira and Eli's personal growth and stories, and how they work today to advocate for trans rights, and also what it means to be a two-spirit person, which I'm really blessed to see Eli doing the work to kind of let people know what a two-spirit person is and the advocacy around that. We had a couple takeaways for being a better ally. And of course, some of that starts right here, right now, with you coming to this Omaha Table Talk, just being present in the room and listening to these stories and these takeaways. That allyship starts at home, and it's the work you need to do to educate yourself. There's also an opportunity, trans folks are being attacked left, right, and center at every angle right now in our legislative arenas, statewide and federally. So pay attention to what's available to you in your districts, in your states, of legislation that you can support, people that you can reach out to. And I know that Abbi's foundation does incredible work to help educate you. There's also, if you're in Iowa, the program One Iowa can do that as well. And also there was the takeaway on the collective or community. One of the people in my group belongs to the Second Unitarian Church, and their website is 2UU Omaha. And they do have a support network for trans individuals called OATS. And they often have speakers. Dr. Ferial Person is there often. So they're doing it Zoom virtually right now. So if you are interested or want to show up and get to know the trans community of Omaha more, definitely reach out and look for that resource. And they have a website too, uuomaha.org.
Thanks for that. And so from room 5, Nicole, if you have a couple points that you'd like to share out from.
All right. We had the pleasure of having Eli in our room. Was very helpful. We had shared some personal stories that they were able to ask. Eli were able to give them pointers and also provide his phone number to the people who asked the questions. So one of the things that we talked about also was the being mispronoun. So we got a little bit more information about how pronouns work, and then how it brings about solidarity and how it brings about people understanding what it really means to have those pronouns. And then also one thing that Eli talked about was the importance of not genderizing things. A lot of times we will make mistakes, but he did say that make sure when you make those mistakes that you apologize gracefully, because you will make those mistakes. But just being aware of not to generalize people to make them feel like the others, because it boxes people in, and you never want to have a person not have a voice because they're not able to be who they are.
Thank you for sharing that out, Nicole. Moving on to room 6, and it will be Tina that will be sharing up room 6.
Hello. Some of the takeaways from our conversation were a shared kind of exhaustion is one of the themes, is that like this is still such a struggle, specifically for trans youth. There was a lot of emotion around that, and just a general feeling of, you know, tiredness of still having to fight. And then also the, you know, revelation that like it will still be hard even when you are living your full true self. The fact that it will still be a struggle. And then we talked about some ways to be better accomplices and allies were to decriminalizing sex work would be a great place to start. Also opening up your home if you have the ability to do so, standing up for folks, calling in and calling out, yeah, I think that was everything that we had. It was a good conversation. So thanks.
Thanks for that, Tina. And so going on to room 7, and I understand Kel, you'll be sharing out.
Yep, I volunteered to share out. When we were talking about our emotional responses, some of the words that came up were delighted, impressed, smiling a lot at the vulnerability and the bravery. And a lot of the conversation we had centered around becoming aware of our own privilege and power and how we can use that better, so then I'll just jump down to kind of our takeaways and things that we talked about. The Department of Ed health standards, which I think Darla put in the chat, the link to comment and support on those and how important that was, especially after hearing the panelists talk about how difficult their childhoods were and how they didn't understand why people were treating them differently and being so mean, and how important those health standards are, and to get them passed and to get them into schools. And then of course, just normalizing these conversations and using our pronouns all the time, because then I know with me personally, having it in my email signature line and having it on my Zoom, people ask me, what is that? Why is that there? And then it opens up the conversation.
Thank you for sharing out for room 7. And then our last room for the night, Alina, and I think you're sharing out for that group.
Thank you, Dominic. Yeah, in our room, we had a great group. I think it was the best group of all. We were really, talking about learning a lot. Some of the things that we were really shocked to discover was the life expectancy for Black trans. That was a big moment that we were like shocked, right? The emotional response for that. And we were really excited and happy to relearn the difference between sexual orientation and gender identity, and how the two are misconstrued sometimes. And we don't talk enough about how no one can tell you what you are, what your sexual orientation is, and what your gender identity is. So we love that Eli, kind of shined a light on that for us. We also talk about dead name terminology, and this is a new term to a few of us in our room, because knowing who someone was before they came out, and having to kind of relearn and maybe ask more questions around pronouns. What is the correct pronoun that you'd like to be called, and relearning who this new person is, or what their new identity is before they came out. So one of our participants, she mentioned she struggled a little bit because she knew some very close friends prior to them coming out, and then looking at them in a different lens. So new terminology that we learned, and we also talked about how we could, personally take some steps to help educate ourselves. Being here is part of that, and helping educate even in our families, or being that very good friend that uses the proper pronouns for someone even when they're not there. So correcting people on pronouns even when your friend is not around, or when they're referring to somebody, and just being that ally to your friends. And that's kind of what we talked about.
Thank you for sharing that, Alina. Before we move on, due to time, because I know we are due to wrap up at 7:30 here, Abbi and I would like to share out a couple of call to action items that each of our organizations would like to make you all aware of. So Abbi, if you'd like to go with yours.
Actually, several of the groups mentioned this when they shared out, or have already put in the chat. Information regarding the Nebraska Department of Education's health standards. They have drafted some standards that are LGBTQ inclusive. They are age appropriate, medically accurate, trauma informed. They've done a good job, and they need to hear from the public, especially if you are in support of those standards. So we've put the link to the health standards and also an email address where you can submit comments are in the chat. So that is there if you would like to do that.
Awesome. And I'm just going to share this here. The other call to action item that we wanted to share out with everybody is about LB 231. This was not given. This is to prohibit conversion therapy, and this needs our support. This was not given priority designation at the committee level, so it needs our advocacy so that it can be addressed and can advance outside the committee stage and be a part of the wider legislative body. I know we've talked about it on our Facebook page as well. So just letting the committee members know how important it is. And that would be great. At this
I'm
point,
gonna get on to the end of that, Dominic. Oh,
yes,
sorry.
please.
I'm gonna add on
ahead.
to the end of that. There was like a second part of my call to action. If you are interested in getting more involved in helping.
And Abby, you muted yourself.
I do that at least once every Zoom meeting. It is not a Zoom meeting if I'm not talking while muted. I just put in the chat, if you're more interested in helping on LB 231, that conversion therapy ban, you should email our community organizer at OutNebraska. Their name is MAR at outnebraska.org. Get involved with some phone banking or text banking that we'll have coming up. Thank you.
Awesome. I know we
I
were
want to
hoping...
say quickly that if you call the Nebraska Department of Education, you'll be speaking to me. And I know that I've spoken to a lot of people and they're all very against diversity and inclusion. And it's great to hear supportive voices. I'm very happy to give resources. And if you want to talk to the people who are putting that together, it's always nice to have some encouragement. I know that a lot of people call to complain about the social studies standards, and it's funny that I'm answering the phone as a queer trans woman, and I'm friends with a woman who does the social studies work, and she's a Black woman, and so we talk about the irony of the people that we talk to being adverse to who we are and those values. So feel free to call anytime.
Yes, please do call. I also wanted to just add here real quickly, Avalisa and I have been working on a very special project, and it is called Frankly Speaking, and it is going to be airing live this coming Friday on Speaking of Happy's Facebook page and YouTube channel. But it is literally a frank conversation between myself, Avalisa, and 3 other folks who are transgender, non-binary, and gender non-conforming. So if you're interested in kind of piggybacking onto this conversation and hearing more, there will be ability for you to ask questions within the chat as well. This will be the first of, we hope, many episodes. If you want to support us, I can plop our little Patreon page information link to that, because this is a labor of love. It all comes out of my pocket. So anybody that wants to help support it, I would greatly appreciate it. And so would Avalisa, because then she can continue to be paid for what she's participating in with me. So thank you very much. I appreciate you all for being here and for your really great questions and your attention and listening. Very much appreciated.
Thank you all. And I know we have ran out of time for tonight, but I do want to thank Abby for our continued partnership on these queer table talks with Nebraska. Thank you to Avalisa, Eli, and Andira for being willing to be on this panel and being so vulnerable with your own stories as well. I did post into the chat the link to our evaluation page. I'm posting it again right now. We do encourage everybody to go on and give some feedback to us on how we can continue to make these table talks better. And our next Omaha Table Talk is actually next week. It is over the noon hour, and it will be on Native and Indigenous peoples, the Nebraska experience. If you want to register for that, Alina just put in the links to register for our next 3 OTTs as well. And there's our next Queer Table Talk with Nebraska is actually on May 4th as well. And that will be discussing SOGI, sexual orientation, gender identity expression. I have to go through all the letters, and askable adults. So more information on that will be on our Facebook page, website, and along with Nebraska. So thank you all so much for being here tonight, and we'll see you next time.